I want to explore the intersection of two very different but instructive stories: the looming spectre of UK tax rises and a wealth tax, and the re-emergence of Alex Belfield, the stalker, um, the fellow who made Jeremy Vine's life miserable, fresh from prison, apparently unrepentant, and notably, how should we say, diminished. And it may seem incongruous to mention them both in the same breath, but they both tell us something about the character of Britain in 2025, a country with frightening budget deficits and a political culture prone to music hall outbursts, but perhaps too distracted to notice either properly. And, and so people pass stuff off as if it's original without recognizing that it all goes back to, in the case of Alex Belfield, Max Miller and Larry Grayson, his camp array of non-existent friends like Tarquin, these people just out of sight, just in the wings, and it's a wonderful gimmick. I use it myself, particularly when I talk about Matt Hancock, who gets into the let's get into the stationery cupboard and make it move. I want an HB pencil with a rubber, and for me, there's an entire cast of characters out there, but I know where they come from. They come from these brilliant music hall artistes, and they're they're very much something of the 1940s. By the time Larry Grayson got hold of it all, shut that door. It was Old Hat and Frankie Howard, bitter. And and I'm conscious of that. I'm not sure that Alex Belfield is conscious of that. But let's begin with the serious bit: the United Kingdom's public finances. The Office for Budget Responsibility's latest report was unusually stark. Richard Hughes, the OBR chief, said that Britain cannot afford the array of promises displayed to the public. And the message: politicians have been lying to us for years, promising lavish spending without admitting someone has to pay. So consider this. The UK now has the sixth highest debt and the third highest borrowing costs among advanced economies. Local councils are buckling under the weight of adult and children's social care, with some spending over 80% of their revenue on it. And defence spending is pledged to rise to 3.5% of GDP by 2035, an extra £40 billion annually. And in two recent, very costly U-turns on winter fuel payments and disability benefits, both over £6 billion, you see why the Chancellor is preparing for a deeply uncomfortable autumn budget. Economists expect a £10 to £20 billion budget in new taxes this autumn, and we have to be honest, the old games are wearing thin: fiscal drag, stealth freezes of threshold, small print raids on ISAs. These are the unheroic levers left when you refuse to touch income tax rates directly, and the options are politically toxic. Wealth taxes, in theory popular, in practice hard to enforce and prone to capital flight. Already so many wealthy people have left the country in the first year of this Labour government. Remember, the UK competes with places like the UAE and Italy for wealthy residents. Capital gains and inheritance tax reforms, easier but already unpopular, and Reeves has raised the CGT once, she might again. Broader national insurance to cover rents and dividends, technically logical, politically incendiary, particularly given the promises made by the Labour government during the election. So all this while the economy is flatlining. GDP fell in April and May, and business investment is cautious. Borrowing costs are up, partly thanks to Trump's tariffs upsetting global trade. So, yes, Reeves is accused of planning a tax time bomb, and frankly, it's hard to see how she avoids lighting the fuse. And then there's Alex Belfield, a man who, in his own mind at least, once fancied himself, well, he's the only one who did, once fancied himself as Britain's answer to Howard Stern or perhaps Nigel Farage with jokes. It's just a joke, said Nigel Farage. Well, he would know, the master of humour. And Alex Belfield is out of prison for stalking and harassing, and with admirable predictability but somewhat less audience, he's back to it, mocking the BBC, complaining about the establishment, rattling the tin for PayPal donations, presumably. And here's the irony. He's doing it on his own channel. He's not doing it on YouTube, but he's now claiming that YouTube somehow is shadow blocking him. The only blockage that that Belfield has got is of his own making, and no amount of X-Lax is going to relieve that. And while the Treasury is desperately fishing for any and all revenue, one doubts they'll be sending the Inland Revenue round to check Alex's accounts, because frankly there isn't much to check. It's all limp. Oh, it's gone limp. And he's spent so long shouting about the BBC gravy train that he's missed the real story. Britain's tax base is evaporating, not enriching. And Belfield was once semi-influential. Well, he's got a semi somewhere. And the problem with Belfield is this is an example of so much of Britain, the extraordinary potential and the utter waste in reality. Riding the anti-woke, anti-BBC conspiratorial wave. But even that grift has limits. And today, I think he's become a cautionary tale of populism's burnout, still ranting, but with far fewer clicks. In an age where the public is being prepared for serious tax rises, the likes of Belfield are shouting about imaginary conspiracies and threats and ignoring the actual receipts. If Belfield stands for anything, it's the peculiar British tradition of complaining loudly about government waste while evading any serious discussion about who pays for the state we demand. He's the ghost of fiscal hypocrisy. So what do these two stories have in common? They show us the gap between political theatre and fiscal reality. The UK is facing structural spending pressures that cannot be met by borrowing forever. Aging populations cost money, defence costs money, disability support costs money, taxes will rise. Actually, even keeping someone in prison costs money. It costs more money to put someone in prison than it does to put someone in a private school, what I would call a public school. Well, many of the private schools are public schools, but we just have to tighten our belts and recognise taxes will rise on income, on savings, or else services will collapse. There's no third option. Yet much of our political and media class, from Belfield's rants to Westminster's cautious evasions, refuse to level with voters, refuse to level with real people. The tax system, Rachel Reeves and Belfield are living in a fantasy world, not together, of course. But this autumn's budget will be a moment for some honesty, and perhaps it will be another exercise in stealth taxes and obfuscation, made worse by self-defeating threats of capital flight if the richest are even asked to pay even slightly more. And if it doesn't work, I suppose there'll be tears before bedtime. In the meantime, Alex Belfield, no doubt, will continue ranting to his shrunken audience about the death of free speech and the evils of the BBC, missing the far more serious story that Britain simply can't afford its own pontifical illusions. In the end, Britain's tax debate is about grown-up choices. We can face them, or we can indulge clowns on YouTube and their own funny channels who shout about conspiracies while actual bills pile up. The choice is ours, and the Treasury is waiting.